Hello, and welcome to a brand new edition of Get to Know Your City. I'm your host, Milt Van Natta. Today, pleased to be joined by the Mayor of Wisconsin Rapids, Zach Vruwink. And today we're going to be talking about his candidacy for a third term as mayor of our city. We're getting all set for the Tuesday, April 5th general election, when our mayor will face off with Robert Nash for a 2-year term. Mayor, welcome to our program. It's good to talk to you again.
Milt, thanks for having me again.
My joy. Now, Mayor, what did you learn from the primary election? Just a little over 2,000 votes cast. You were the leading vote getter. What did you glean out of those results?
Well, I was appreciative of the number of residents that did show up to the polls. There wasn't a lot on the ballot. There was a Supreme Court primary also on the ballot. But beyond that, there wasn't a lot of reason for people to turn out. And I think in a municipal election, people cherish their right to vote. And so it was really neat to see the number of people that did show up. Whether or not they supported me, they certainly used their right to vote, and I was appreciative for that. Obviously, it was nice to come out on top with over 50% of the vote. For me, it's a validation, I believe, of the work and the ambition and the energy I'm putting into the position to make our city a better place. And but it's the first hurdle. There is no guarantees following a primary. Of course, we're taking the election now just as seriously as we were before the primary, now into the general.
I would suspect that the voter turnout in the general election is going to be very dependent on whether or not one of the presidential primaries is still in play, one of the nominations is still in play. What kind of voter turnout models are you working with in terms of the April 5th general election?
Well, I'm hoping that, having been through now two general elections prior to this, within that 40% range, different elections each time, right? Different variables. And you talk about a presidential contest now. It'll be interesting because I'm hoping that we have over 40% of our voter. Of course, I'd like to see much higher than that, but a realist to me says, we're looking at somewhere in the 40% range of voter turnout again. It could be much higher, like as you say, if one of the contests are still in play.
What will that put the number of voters at? What's 40% level?
It should put it over 4,000, 5,000 voters, somewhere in there.
Okay.
Of the registered elected.
Probably at least twice again what we had in the primary.
Correct. We had about 20-some%, if I remember, in the primary. Yep.
Okay. Well, Mayor, let's get into the issues. Spend our time on those. Since we last talked, one of the big news items, period, has been the water crisis in Flint.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that you as a mayor take very seriously your stewardship over infrastructure of the city. Give us a status report. How are we doing in terms of those vital infrastructure systems?
Sure, that's a great question. When the Flint crisis hit, there were some communications put down through the U.S. Conference of Mayors. It's an organization that represents mayors on federal and state issues. And at that point, nobody had really given any thought or concern to lead water pipes, and water sources and things. And for me, it forced me to ask some questions of our water utility and start to get an analysis and understanding of that. But water alone at this point, it opened my eyes to the fact that homes built at a certain period of time, that every community that had development at that time has lead water pipes, and that certain chemical composition of a water supply can draw out contaminants into the system. And so more recently, I just read in the Gannett newspaper, I don't know if it's a state coverage or what, but the fact that there are some additional concerns in our state's water supply. So it really has elevated the need for municipal officials to start asking questions and start paying closer attention to what might be of concern. In our community, our water infrastructure, we get most of our water from the east of our city. Most of it comes from the town of Grand Rapids area. It's piped into the city, and then it's treated at our facility. And there's been some improvements made to that process over the years to reduce costs. We commend the utility for their work to do that. And then beyond water, though, we start thinking about transportation and roads. Those are the ones that people are most concerned about because they're the ones we experience every day, beyond the ones that turning on our faucet, for example. And so, our road infrastructure continues to be challenged. Fortunately, we didn't have a very hard winter this year, and so having a forgiving winter can be beneficial for our road maintenance. Nonetheless, though, it forces us to continue to think long term. And one thing that we've begun to do through the hiring of our Director of Public Works last fall was to put together a comprehensive capital improvements plan. Our capital improvements planning in the city has ebbed and flowed over many years under many administrations. There were different approaches to it under different mayors and different councils. And one approach we're taking right now is we have to look at all of our infrastructure holistically, right? Streets and things might get higher attention because it's something, again, that we experience every day.
Right.
But taking a look at our wastewater infrastructure, for example, our lift stations, we have a number of lift stations that are a similar age. And what happens is when they need to be replaced, they're all going to need to be replaced at a similar time. So how we plan our financial preparation for that is of critical importance. And then you take a look at the river crossing, which connects the west side of the river, the effluent flowing to the treatment plant on the west side to the east side. Another very old piece of infrastructure that right now we're just beginning some analysis to televise to determine the current state of it. Is it something where we can get some more time out of, or is it something we need to accelerate our replacement of? All of those, whether it's the west side lift station, which moves the effluent from the west to the underground connection to the east, all of those pieces of infrastructure will need to be replaced at some point in their lifetime, right? They don't last forever. Right. So for us to ensure that we've got capital availability, whether it's borrowing capacity or if we're using state trust fund loans or going out to the open market, we need to be prepared with cost estimates and some designs to be able to do those repairs, those necessary replacements and repairs. And then there's also the maintenance cycle, right? What maintenance should we be doing on a regular basis? So beyond our streets and our water and our wastewater, we're also taking a look at, as our utility does, our electric replacement. So they've got a capital plan that goes out many years that looks at just some of the basic stuff from streetlights, our conversion from high pressure sodium to LED street lighting. It's obviously more efficient, it's lower cost, and the longevity is longer than current technology that's in a lot of our streetlights today. And then our bridges, there's another component. We heard a lot with bridges when Minnesota had some of their crises. But in general, there is a greater need for capital in our infrastructure than we have available to us. So we have to be very smart and proactive with our maintenance cycles and really scrutinize them to make sure that we're getting the full life that we need out of all of our infrastructure. So, starts with Flint, right? Mm-hmm. And only a news story or a real tragedy, but there's a lot of other things that go into that. And so the capital improvements plan is a work in progress. It also includes buildings. The city owns a number of facilities beyond the city hall that people are familiar with, are between our fire stations, the building we're in here at Centralia, all of which have needs when it comes to capital and maintenance on a long-term basis.
But it sounds as if you feel comfortable with being on top of it. Things are being continually evaluated and inspected, and you feel like we're on top of the infrastructure issues.
We're getting there. We're getting there. I wouldn't say we're there.
Okay.
I would say that a considerable amount of time is being spent on all the sections, whether it's wastewater, streets, parks, for example, is another one I didn't mention, all of which are working to analyze their levels of assets, right? Whether it's a street asset or a under street, or if it's a building, that every one of those are being analyzed right now for inclusion in a capital improvements plan. And so department heads, with the help of the Director of Public Works, are working to pull that plan together. But we've started with the major unknowns. So when I say, are we comfortable? When we start with those that were unknown and we have a little bit better understanding of where the status of they're at, then we're going to have a better comfort level. But it's not to say that we're not going to have a major amount of reconstruction or investment that needs to go into infrastructure, and that's just the basic sort of obligation of a city and making sure we've got public utilities available for our residents.
Let's move to economic development. Spend some time looking at that from There's so many issues that are interconnected when we talk about economic development in our community. But at the most basic level, Mayor, what can a city do, what should a city do to make itself attractive and open to business and economic development?
Well, that's something that everyone has an opinion on, right?
Yeah.
And so there's, as you mentioned, it's very complex in terms of when you look at it from a global or holistic view. And so in this city, to make ourselves more competitive, to ensure that we address areas of maybe where we're lacking, and so we started, for example, just a couple of years ago with an asset study. We hadn't done an asset study of all of our, beyond just our basic infrastructure, and the needs that we have to have available for business growth and development, but even looking beyond that, taking a look at our industrial parks, for example. Do we have the latest and greatest need for, the land available and rail spur and a lot of those basic economic development, more traditional, conventional assets available? So there's that need to make sure that we're staying competitive. And then there's the whole rate structure. Are we competitive in our wastewater, our electric, and our water utility rates? Not to mention our tax rates, another indicator or thing that people look at. But then you start taking a look at things like broadband. And the fact that our local internet service provider in Solaris, with their rich history in our community, has really invested in a forward-thinking, forward-looking fashion, saying if Wisconsin Rapids is going to be competitive, where we all call home, where people that not only show up to work there every day, but show up to all these industry and businesses to work, that are they going to be able to have the infrastructure available to make them successful and compete? Ultimately, if they can't, if let's say Renaissance Learning can't get the broadband and the fiber to their buildings that they can get in places like where they have offices in Vancouver, Washington, or in Madison, or New York City, for example, they're going to grow in those places. And so it goes for any industry, whether it's in manufacturing or high tech. But then we take a look at healthcare, and this community's had a vibrant conversation, a healthy discussion about healthcare delivery in the last 2 years, with the sale of with Riverview Hospital and the affiliation with the Aspirus system. And I'm assured, based on conversations I've had with some of their board members, as well as their newly seated CEO, to understand that there's opportunity here. There's major economic opportunity here, but it's going to take someone that sees that opportunity, that looks beyond maybe the gloom and doom that some of us tend to find ourselves in from time to time, and say, okay, where's the business opportunity? Where's the sense that for us to get growth? And we're seeing in the healthcare space, they projected it when they came to town and came to the city, meaning Aspirus, when they said there is leakage coming from this community in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And it's a shame that the city or our provider hadn't been capturing that. So over the course of the affiliation and the transaction, their board of directors now and their CEO, many of which had served previously under the current or under the community ownership of the hospital, all have recognized that there's major opportunity here. And that's assuring for me as a community leader, because I know there's going to be major capital investment here, but there's also going to be job growth, and people are going to be able to find employment that don't exist, that employment opportunities that don't exist today, because of the whole view of how healthcare delivery will be provided not only to Rapids area residents, but a much larger region, what they're calling the South Central region of their network. So really encouraging news when we talk about economic development. So what's the city's role in all that? Well, one is to be responsive. So when they come to us with plans, whether they're building plans or whether it's capital plans for new development, new buildings, that we're able to respond to those in a fairly timely fashion. And to make sure that we're providing them an adequate level of review and then promoting their development. The other aspect, the intangible, what can the city do to help, the hospital is going to be looking for talent that doesn't exist here. When you talk about physicians or other skilled individuals that may not be residing in our marketplace today, meaning Point Rapids, maybe even Wausau, and Marshfield, where are those people coming from for work? The city must have an active role in its workforce development. And that's something that in my time, we've taken a supporting role in an initiative called Workforce Central, where a group of employers have all talked and shared their concerns and challenges. Well, then the city then can help put together programs to help attract or retain their employment base. Because again, if they can't find the employees, they're not going to grow. They can have all the money in the world, but if they can't bring people to the community or get people trained that are here, we face a major disadvantage as a city. So when we talk about economic development, those are some of the things I haven't mentioned maybe in our past interview, and then some of the more noteworthy or more recent discussions related to our center of our city. Something that we've taken a really hard look at over the last number of years, but also gotten very serious and put our money where our mouth is, saying if we're truly in wanting to make a strong central place, not only for our residents, but for people that live around the community and visitors who would be looking to host conventions in a community. You talk about the asset we have in the Hotel Mead and the other hotels we have in the market. We need to do things to make ourselves more vibrant and more attractive, or we simply won't be a player. And not being a player, to me, is not an option. And I think, in hearing our residents, they want somebody in the mayor's office to make sure that they're open to development, they're open to new ideas, they're actively recruiting and soliciting new opportunities from the very, very small, to the large business opportunity. There's a whole spectrum there. I think that a lot of times attention and focus is given to the large, saying we're going to recruit and attract, multi-$100 million company, a couple hundred jobs. But if you look across the state, That doesn't happen. It doesn't happen really anywhere. There are sectors of which things happen and major expansions happen, of course, but there are businesses that are currently in the marketplace or in the state, for example. So that's kind of a view of my economic development activity at the city and what we've done to incentivize development. The other component that I mentioned, that I'll mention, is our Grow Rapids initiative, and that's really putting all of the tools and resources that are available to developers and businesses all online. So they're in an easy place to find. They're not having to flip through a 3-ring binder, for example, that may have outdated information. But it's also supporting them and being nimble, giving them full access to information that they had to come to City Hall for before. And that's it's a shift. That's a major shift for the city. When you have an industry that's dominant in the marketplace that you don't need to diversify and think about these things. It's been a retooling of sort of city processes to get there. Again, it's a work in progress. We're not going to have that overnight, but we're certainly made great strides. Developers tell us on an often basis whether they're looking at buying land in the industrial park that they appreciated so much having the answers to their questions without having to come to us, right? And so it moves our conversation then to say, how else can we support you? What are your gaps? Are there capital needs? And those sorts of things. And when we talk about capital, the city has active participation in the Regions Revolving Loan Fund. And that fund is a federal money that is regionalized that the city's been a part of for many years. I actually have been the president for the last year and a half, and we've done deals now in Wisconsin Rapids. In fact, we just supported the sale of the IGA stores and to a new ownership there. So they could reinvest in the company and continue to provide, obviously, a great grocery experience for our residents. So that was a recent example. So economic development, as you mentioned, is very complex. It touches so many variety of things, from workforce to, obviously, the redevelopment of property, and we've taken a hard look at that in buying property downtown, but also making sure that vacancies, we start looking at vacancies. When Staples leaves town, for example, what is the city doing to actively promote and recruit a tenant for that space? And so we were very proud to have MC Sports take a market opportunity and seeing that we've had leakage in our sporting goods space forever, and they've taken advantage of that leakage, and we're pleased to have them be a long-term tenant in the Staples property.
Mayor, our heritage as a community is a paper-producing community. There's a lot of unease in the community about the future of the paper-producing industry as it presently exists.
Yes.
It seems to be a balance issue to me, where on one hand the city wants to support and encourage the health of what is now Verso, and yet has this need to be prepared if something happens with the industry locally.
Right.
Talk to me about how you manage that tough balance.
Yeah, well, much of the city's view of that is the fact that industry has to do what it needs to do to survive, right? Propping an industry up with certain, inflating sort of the support for them is never healthy for anybody, for the industry or the community. And many communities are struggling with that. When I look at the other paper-making communities that are still dominated by an industry, and many of those communities are looking at that saying, well, if we can just keep them alive for a period longer. Fortunately, though, our assets that are here are newer than many of the assets around the country. And so, and beyond that, having an integrated operation in Verso's craft, pulp, paper, and then the production side. Now, that's not to say that they're out of the woods. There's no question in that they have a lot to do to continue to hit efficiency targets, safety targets, and make the necessary capital investments in their mills to continue to be competitive. The good news is on that front, we do have a diverse kind of, as I mentioned with the pulp paper example, the pulp production and then the paper making process, is it's a very diverse operation. So you look at Corenzo, who makes a completely different product than Verso. Another industry located in the community that's making a very significant investment. In fact, there's a machine on its way from France right now, that's going to be installed here at Corenzo in Wisconsin Rapids. Another major investment to ensure their viability as they go forward. Now, as we all know, when you automate, there's also the human push-pull, that where there may be jobs displaced over the long term, not initially, or through attrition that may not be filled via the installation of more advanced technology. So it is a balancing act. There's no doubt about that. And then you look at another player with Catalyst in the region, and another foreign ownership and outside ownership of the community from somewhere else. that owns that asset in our backyard, and they're competing against their player across the river in some markets and things. So it's obviously very delicate, but for the city to be very transparent and speak about the facts, that we're not going to sugarcoat the fact that the paper industry is rosy, right? We're going to be frank about it, but it's also forces us to encourage their efforts to find talent and to make sure that they don't go too long without unfilled positions in critical areas, because that hurts their competitiveness. If they can find, back to the issue earlier, if Verso can't find workers here, they're going to have to make business decisions to cease operations or move things elsewhere, etc. Right. So those are the things we pay attention to in terms of my view of the health of our local suppliers outside of their balance sheets and things that the city doesn't have a direct influence on.
One final piece of the economic discussion today. Recently, that area that is just across the road from the Clock and Bell Tower, we saw the building go down. We're seeing the change. Talk about that in specific, Mayor, and about your vision for using the asset of the river and developing that heart of the city as a part of the revitalization and the greater vision.
Sure. Well, a lot of my vision comes about from past planning. And so I look at the 1996 plan that city did with City Vision, and then I look at the 2004 plan, which is part of the installation of the TIF, and then the 2007 waterfront plan, all plans that existed prior to my assuming office. And I didn't pull anything from the sky in our process to redevelop that site. It all came from past planning. And so in our review of those plans, it all identified opportunity. It didn't say, you should do this now or when, but it all said there's going to be a time when the city should look at that area for redevelopment. And so as properties became available, the city purchased them. And through our process now, we're readying the site for redevelopment. And that means tear down of nearly everything there is what we're anticipating, and then dealing with any contamination that may exist on the site. There's some that we've identified and knew that before we went into it. Much of it is petroleum, so it's lower concern than any other industrial contamination could be, and maybe the paper making process and others that really could have high levels of pollution. So the good news is we're readying that site for redevelopment, and we start taking a look at what are the assets that site is surrounded by. You've got street and infrastructure assets that are now redone. They're brand new, in some part. You take a look at the civic center of the courthouse, the county seat. Think of the visits and the traffic that's in and out of that courthouse every day, not to mention the people that work there. And then you take a look at the river and the fact that many communities, Milwaukee for example, maybe even just outside of Milwaukee, have really taken advantage of that almost juxtaposition between the industrial beer line or manufacturing making, and then taking a look at how housing and office and things can coexist in an environment where people want to live near those things. It's cool, it's trendy to live downtown and to live near a riverfront or live near industry. And then the other asset that we have is the fact that we do a vibrant business scene down there. There's a lot of professional offices that are beyond the civic core with the courthouse and the county offices, and bars and restaurants. And so our plan is to truly capitalize on that by creating demand. And how do you create demand? You create housing. You have people living downtown. So the one component of that development is apartments or housing. Or condos, or a variety of whatever the market demonstrates that it'll bear. The other component is potentially office space and some commercial office space. Our office space portfolio in the city, when you look across the city, there isn't a lot of newer office space. And so businesses that are here, that are looking to grow or maybe relocate to an area, there isn't a lot of newer office space available. And then the last component of that is, of the mixed use idea, is restaurants and service-based businesses on the main floor. So we are thinking a multi-story development, maybe 3-4 stories. And just actually earlier this week, I was reading about Stevens Point's development. And they had, in their former Lullaby site, it was a manufacturing site that had major contamination, environmental contamination downtown, across from the former mall. The city bought it in 2008. Now we're here in 2016. They finally have a plan for for redevelopment. Now, I sure hope that ours won't take that long, and I'm guessing, based on some early information we have on our market feasibility, that we'll demonstrate that there is demand for some development downtown. And so that'll convert what used to be about $1 million in property tax base and create a $9 or a $10 million redevelopment. So the tax base growth will be at least fivefold. It might be $10 million in construction, but $5 million in tax base. All of which being captured in our downtown TIF that was established well before I was in office. So really making good on a lot of our past planning has been an effort of mine, and we're certainly going to see dividends of it as it comes to fruition. Fortunately, we've made progress in acquisition of property. We've got more to go, but we do have developers. In fact, one messaged me this morning, the same developer looking at the Stevens Point downtown site, very interested in what is Wisconsin Rapids looking at doing in their downtown? They get downtown, they get waterfront, they get the vision, and certainly there's other developers beyond them. And that's a local developer that's working in that community. And then you look at Wausau and a lot of their downtown developments and riverfront developments. This isn't foreign, right? This isn't a far-fetched concept. It's just up to the city now to really incentivize and take those forward steps to make it a reality.
There has been some discussion in our city, Mayor, that it would be appropriate for us to go to a different model of city government that included a city planner / manager, administrator, and maybe even cut the mayor's position to a part-time position. What's your take on the organization of city government and what's best for it going forward?
That's a debate, as you mentioned, that's been alive for many years. First of which, I think the mayor's term should be changed to a 4-year term. That's something that, by having a 2-year term, I walk past the mayor's pictures outside the mayor's office, and you can look at the terms of which these mayors have served. Many of them have served for 4, 8, or 10 years, right? And there's a reason for that. The community wanted to keep course during periods of time when they felt that things might have been headed in a direction that the community wanted. I can say now, having served 2-year terms, 4 years in office nearly, that a 4-year term is the commonplace, right? That we are very unique in that we still have a strong mayor form of government, which I tend to favor, a strong mayor council form of government. I think if certain department head levels can be professionalized, like we've done in the area of public works, for example, where they have strong leadership to provide over those groups, something we enacted last fall, I don't see a real major need for us to depart from a strong mayor council form of government. My concern is getting candidates in the future to run for office that are committed to the long-term view, which is something that I have been committed to, and saying, as much as I like those short wins, we want those quick wins, gratification, the community has to think long-term in its planning, or you're never going to get major development and major growth in the city. So I tend to favor a strong mayor form of government. There are certainly pros and cons to the model. You can get individuals who may not have the administrative experience or the background. And I would say even when I ran for office, there hasn't been a mayor that's had experience running a city before, right? So every mayor is going to be inexperienced to a degree. It's just how do they use the skill set and the life experience that they've had to be able to be a successful mayor. So I think the model is fine. I do think that we need to make it a 4-year term. It's something I heard loud and clear when I was knocking doors 2 years ago and saying, well, you were just at my door a year and a half ago. Why aren't you spending time furthering the city? And I would say, absolutely, is there a time period of the campaign process or electoral process that I'm not as productive because now I'm spending time here in the afternoon interviewing with you. So I think it's getting serious about that, and I don't sense that there'd be a major resistance to it as I heard on the campaign trail, knocking doors. But I do think some communities that have had real successful city managers or city administrators, they're very happy and it works very well for them. And they have maybe part-time mayors. Some communities, there's another variety where they have a full-time mayor and a full-time city administrator. West Allis is an example of that, where it works out very well. The mayor and the administrator work very well. So there's a whole variety. I don't think we have to think about there's only 2 options. There's a variety of options that as our city continues to change, we may have to think about those options. But today I'm not proposing that we make changes to our administration or administrative structure beyond making the mayor's term a 4-year term.
So would you forward the notion of going to a 4-year term in a more substantial way, as in taking action? And
It happened. Right after I was in my first term, they converted the attorney, the treasurer, and the clerk to a 4-year term. The mayor somehow failed. It narrowly failed by one vote. I believe they needed they needed a supermajority, 6 of 8, and they had the 5 supporting it. So it was interesting at that point. I believe there were attempts prior to that as well, but it requires a charter ordinance and something that I believe the council's committed to considering in their upcoming time.
Okay. Well, is our last question for this conversation, which has gone so quickly, Mayor.
Yeah, it has.
Just share with me, sitting here on behalf of all the voters of the city, as to why you would have us support you by voting for you on Tuesday, April the 5th.
Well, Milt, thanks again for the time. I really appreciate the opportunity to serve. It truly is an honor to be able to go to work for the city every day. I'll tell you, before I ran for office, I never thought about all of the things I could be carrying with me as I went to bed every night. And it has been an amazing, challenging, incredibly rewarding experience serving as the mayor of this great city. And I'm not finished. I've done a lot of work to build and set in motion a lot of initiatives, and that's what's making me not even bat an eye at whether or not I want to serve another term. This is home, right? And it'll always be home for me. And I think, when I come back here, when I'm here as a resident, not as mayor though, right? And look at this community, I want to make sure that it's still it's a growing and vibrant and thriving place. And I want to make sure that my time in office is reflected on that vision. And it's a personal goal of mine. I hope residents hold me to that same standard. I think they do when I hear from them or talk to residents. And believe fully that my experience and time in office has really made the city a better place. Some apparent, some not so apparent. Obviously, there's an administrative role of the mayor that keeps the mayor in City Hall and keeps operations rolling. But there's also that external component. And I've tried to foster a good mixture of the two and believe that if the residents give me the opportunity to serve for another 2 years, they're going to see many of the projects come to fruition. Hopefully in my time yet in office, some maybe after I leave office, but certainly would appreciate the opportunity to serve for another 2 years. I bring my ambition, my aspirations to the finer city to office every day, and my hope is that residents will give me that second chance.
I'd like to sneak in one follow-up question before we conclude. I've heard you on 2 or 3 occasions allude to that time after you're no longer mayor. Is there a season that you have in your mind that you think would be ideal, whether that be 8 years, 10 years, 6 years? It just sounds to me a little bit like you're thinking about it. Maybe no decisions, but it's in your mind.
Yeah, that's a question I get. Kids ask me, right? And then adults ask me. It doesn't matter. What are your plans after office? Why? I don't have any specific plans. That I will be completely transparent. People always ask, and maybe they're fishing. If I'd be willing to come work for them, I don't know. But the point is, I do think that if it's a 4-year term, that 2 4-year terms is enough. I don't
it's a good,
think
healthy time.
It is. Yeah, not many mayors. There were some mayors like Penza and others that served for 10 years. I think 10 years is a long time. I do think the community changes a lot in 10 years. But if they're given the opportunity to serve 2 4-year terms for a total of 8, is a real good amount of time. And so if I am so fortunate to serve another 2-year term, I don't know. We'll see where the community is at and where I'm at in 2 years from now. And so that's a great question. But I do think in speaking with former Mayor Carson or Mayor Bach or even Wruwink, right? They all had a period of time where they wanted to make that difference, and at some point your ideas aren't fresh anymore. And I tell kids that I'm no longer the new guy, right? And so at some point there's hopefully going to be a new guy or gal that's willing to put their time forth to make the city a better place.
Thank you for your time today, Mayor.
All right, Mel.
Appreciate
Thank you.
That's our mayor, Zach Vruwink, and he is running for a third 2-year term as our mayor. The general election is on Tuesday, April the 5th. He'll be contested by Robert Nash. We encourage you to get out and vote on that day. This is Get to Know Your City. I'm Milt Van Natta. Thank you for joining us, and we'll have a new edition very soon.